Hello, it's good to see you again. I'm Professor Colin Elliott. I am a historian at Indiana University. I'm also the host of the Pax Romana podcast. And we're here in my office, very excited to be able to record these from my office. This is actually the sixth part of a six-part video series. So you're coming in at the end if you're just watching this for the first time, but that's okay. This is a self-contained YouTube video. You don't have to have watched the first 5 videos, but let me just show you a little bit about what it's in those videos in case you want to go back and check those out as a kind of preface for what we're going to talk about today. So in the first video, we're looking at ancient Italy, its landscape, technology, its climate, from about 4000 BC through about 1000 BC. After that, we then got into the cities that rose up in Italy and the phenomena of city-states. What was a city-state? What did that mean in the context of ancient Italy? Then we got to the founding of ancient Rome. This is, after all, the origins of ancient Rome. We are talking about what Rome was like before it was an empire, before it was even a republic. Deep, deep history of ancient Rome. And so we looked at the founding and the legendary story of Romulus and Remus in part 3. Part 4 then got into the initial kingdom, the monarchy, its first few kings, Romulus, Numa, and so on. And then Rome gets taken over by Etruscans. And I put the pause button in play at that point because you needed to learn a little bit about the Etruscans, and that's what we just talked about in part 5. So you can go back and check out that video on my YouTube channel if you wish. Prof CPE, look that up on YouTube and you can find all of these videos. But today we're going to get to the dramatic fall of Rome's last king. We'll do a little bit of background information on the Etruscan kings that show up before the final king. We will get into that, and then we'll talk about the very, very, very first act of the men that would come to found the Roman Republic. All right, let's get to part 6, from tyranny to triumph. When we left off with the story of Rome even before the Republic, Rome was in the midst of its monarchic period, and the Etruscans had finally taken over Rome. The Etruscans were Rome's neighbor to the north. They were a loose, culturally united, but not necessarily hegemonic or maybe even confederate group of cities that shared similar practices, political structures, deities, religious rituals, those sorts of things. And the Etruscan cities were probably ruled for the most part by monarchs. There is an Etruscan king that is appointed by the Senate after the death of Rome's king Ancus Marcius. And this Etruscan king was an outsider, right? His name was Tarquinius Priscus, and he took over in 616 or so BC. I always say or so or we think because the fact is our best source for this period is the Roman author Livy. He wrote 5 centuries after all of this happened, so we don't really know. What you're looking at on your screen is a coin that does not reference the king directly, Tarquinius Priscus, this Etruscan king, but it does reference something that he brought in, which is called the curule chair. The curule chair was used by people with political power in Etruscan cities, but it also came to, or maybe had already symbolized, authority across several different Mediterranean cultures. We even see curule chairs all the way in Egypt. That's this chair right here on the coin. So this is just one of many traditions that Tarquinius Priscus, the first Etruscan king, is credited for bringing in. He evidently celebrated triumphs, that is, the generals that led his soldiers who were successful against a foreign enemy were paraded through the city. They were dressed like the chief deity of the city. This is Jupiter Optimus Maximus. So the triumphator would wear a purple toga and a laurel wreath, almost kind of mimicking the god. He brought in, according to Livy, the fasces, so the sort of bundle of sticks, right? There were all of these sticks together. These symbolized the power of imperium because coming out of the bundle of sticks was an axe. And this symbolized the power of a magistrate or a leader, or in this case, the king, to execute the death penalty on those who disobeyed him. So that is Tarquinius Priscus. Now, again, is he a real person? Maybe. He might be. I mean, his name is actually Etruscan, so there is that. These rituals were brought in by Etruscans. We see later when we look at Roman kind of proto-coinage, like Roman bronze bars that were probably used as currency. These are copied in many ways from Etruscan bronze bars. There are other images in Etruscan tombs that look similar to images that we see later on in Rome and in areas that are eventually kind of culturally and politically taken over by Rome. So I think there is something to the idea that either this king or some Etruscan king in Rome's past truly did bring in some new traditions, probably around this time, late 7th, early 6th century or so BC. In the mythical history of Tarquinius Priscus, we're told by Livy that he expanded the Roman borders, he captured nearby cities, and brought in a lot of wealth, that he himself was wealthy, and then his foreign conquests were so successful that the Romans became more wealthy, such that their elite class of senators, these would be the advisors to the king, grew in number from 200 members to 300 members. He supposedly even made major improvements to the city with all of this wealth, built sewers, drained the swamps, built the initial structures that would eventually become the Circus Maximus. So there's quite a lot there. However, the previous king's sons were not very happy with Tarquinius Priscus, that is, the sons of Ancus Marcius. They end up assassinating him. And at that point, we get our second Etruscan king. His name is Servius Tullius, and he supposedly reigned quite a long time, right? Over 40 years, from 578 to 535 BC. He was not only a foreign king, but he was also in some ways a very pro-Roman king, in that he fought off other Etruscan cities in order to consolidate power in Rome and to really make Rome the kind of dominant city in this part of Italy. One of the things that we're told that he did is he either established or perhaps expanded the sacred boundary of the city, and this is the Pomerium. Now, this blue line is not exactly where the Pomerium is, but it roughly approximates it. This is not again a physical boundary. It represents where, kind of in a religious or ritualistic sense, the city is, for purposes of distinguishing, where the blessings of the gods are flowing, and then where on the outside of the city, right, where the Romans are supposed to conquer. The Pomerium will be an important boundary, a symbolic boundary in the city of Rome for a long time, because when later leaders and eventually even emperors are able to expand the size of the Roman Empire, they in turn will sometimes expand the size of the Pomerium. What Servius did is he put a wall along the Pomerium, supposedly, or nearby it anyway, which is still to this day called the Servian Wall. And you can see this. This is the wall. This is the blue line. The blue line represents the Servian Wall. The red line, incidentally, is a later wall that is added centuries and centuries later. Now, the Servian Wall is probably not actually as old as the mid-6th century, the mid-500s BC. There have been historians that have analyzed the wall, and they've suggested that it's a little bit newer than that, maybe comes from the early Republican period or thereabouts, but sections of it do survive. And the image that you see on your screen is a surviving section of this sort of most ancient of Roman walls, at least insofar as walls that survive. Servius Tullius also held a census of the Roman population, which Livy says resulted in a pretty high number. So evidently the census revealed that there were around 80,000 men in the city of Rome, which, if you count women and children, we're probably talking at least double that. So over kind of 150,000, maybe more, maybe up to 200,000. That is way, 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 way too high. There is no way that the city of Rome at this point had that kind of population. But what Livy's doing, right, is he's exaggerating for effect. Regardless, because of this census, there are some big changes that happen in the city of Rome, and these are changes that will last, they will outlast the monarchy. So citizens are divided into tribes, urban tribes. So the city of Rome is given 4 tribes, and people are put into those tribes based on socioeconomic status. One of the results of Servius Tullius's census is that the Romans get divided up into categories. So you have a kind of assembly of the fighting men of Rome, the centuriate assembly. And these men are organized in that assembly essentially top down, from wealthiest men to least wealthy men. Men that can afford a horse and armor and a bunch of other stuff, men that can afford, a helmet maybe and a spear, and then men that can not afford really anything. And depending on how high a person is up in that ranking, and also how old they are, so older men get privilege as opposed to younger men, their voting power increases. And if you like these videos and you want to hear more about how the centuriate assembly worked, I can make a video about that later. It's always fun to talk about that in my classroom because it blows the students away to see how open Romans were during the Republican period about how much wealth mattered. And just there is a very clear, open relationship between wealth and political power. The armed citizenry in this assembly, when they would vote, and they would typically vote on like matters of war and peace, capital crimes, would do this outside of the pomerium. You can't have soldiers with arms inside a sacred boundary. That the gods are not going to be happy with that. So you have to hold the assembly right outside the city, and this was done in the Campus Martius. This is the field of Mars. So these fighting age men would assemble in the field of Mars. The king would probably go out to meet them and say, look, what do you think? Should we go fight such and such city? And then they'd say yes or no. And then they were ready to go. Like they're outside the city, and then they can go for it. Unfortunately for him, he was assassinated and replaced by Rome's very evil king, Tarquinius Superbus. This is the third and final Etruscan king, reigned from 534 to traditionally 509 BC. He was an aggressive, confrontational king, constantly fighting wars against his neighbors. When he'd make treaties with the neighboring cities, he would break them. He was a lawless and disrespectful and cruel individual. He would execute rivals. He executed members of the Senate, people who were in his own family even. And, he didn't consult with the Senate. He didn't use the body of nobles as they ought to be used. It was really a reign of terror, both due to Tarquinius Superbus, but also because of his family members, especially his son. And his son's name was Sextus. The tyranny of the era seems to reach its peak with one of the activities of Tarquinius Sextus, the youngest son of Superbus. The men are away in one of Tarquinius's many wars. And of course, all the wives and daughters of the senators and other Romans are still there in the city. Sextus Tarquinius, the son of the king, finds the woman Lucretia. Lucretia is the wife of Collatinus, the Roman senator. And she evidently is a model of Roman virtue. Sextus Tarquinius finds her in her home, and he tells her, I want to sleep with you, and I'm going to sleep with you. And if you don't sleep with me, I'm going to kill a slave, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to say that I caught you and the slave together. And everybody will believe me because I'm the son of the king, and you're going to be shamed for life. And she realizes that she has no choice. And she's raped by Sextus Tarquinius. And obviously this is a huge blow to the honor of a woman who is honorable. Her husband finds out, and he comes back along with other nobles, and they comfort her. They tell her, look, it's not your fault, right? She was helpless and therefore innocent. This is the account from Livy, by the way. And that the guilt belonged solely to the king's son. It was the mind, they said, that sinned, not the body. Without intention, there could never be guilt. So she is not guilty, right? By any objective, she is not guilty. This is what Lucretia says, and it shows her honor. It's a little bit confusing to a modern audience, but hopefully I can explain to you why this happens. So this is what she says. So Lucretia speaks. What is due to Sextus Tarquinius is for you to decide. And she's speaking to elite men, senators. As for me, I am innocent, so she knows she's not guilty, but I will take my punishment. Never shall Lucretia provide a precedent for unchaste women to escape what they deserve. And she means, the word in Latin here is exemplum. And an exemplum is it's where we get the term example, but it's more than that. It's like an object lesson. An exemplum is like almost a person or a thing or a place or an event that embodies a moral lesson. And in her case, what she's saying is this. She knows that she's innocent, but if she is not punished, a woman in the future could say, well, look, I was raped, but really, what if the woman actually did commit adultery? What if the woman wasn't innocent, some woman in the future? And so what Lucretia's saying is, for the principle of justice and for the principle of precedent, I have to die. And she's like, I'm willing to die as well, because before anybody can stop her, she draws a knife from under her robe, drives it into her heart, and fell forward dead. This is an 18th century statue of Lucretia, right? She basically does not want to make a loophole, and this is why she kills herself. At this point, everybody around her is totally shocked. She's got the dagger still in her chest, right? Blood is probably pooling on the floor, and we get this amazing scene. Her father and husband were overwhelmed with grief. While they stood weeping helplessly, a man named Brutus, and if you've seen that name before, you know that this is the distant ancestor of the famous Brutus that was involved in the slaying of Julius Caesar. So it's his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather that actually takes the dagger out of Lucretia's chest, holds it up, and he gives this short but powerful speeches, one of the most influential and history-changing speeches in human history, and it's very short. By this girl's blood, none more chaste, till a tyrant wronged her. And by the gods, I swear that with sword and fire and whatever else can lend strength to my arm, I will pursue Lucius Tarquinius the Proud, his wicked wife, and all his children, and never again will I let them or any other man be king in Rome. So this is Brutus now, right? Telling everybody around him, now this is too much. This has gone too far. Not only are we going to kick out this king and his family, we are going to abolish the monarchy. And at this point, Brutus and Lucretia's husband, Collatinus, decide to chase the kings out. They lead a kind of militia that gets the king and his family out of the city. And we're told in the mythical history that they decide not to be kings themselves, but to break up the power of the monarch and to ensure that that power is held by multiple people at multiple times for limited terms of 1 year, and that the people that hold that power will be elected. So these two men become the first, what are called consuls of the Roman Republic, the two executive magistrates. And the consulship will exist throughout the entire nearly 500-year history of the Roman Republic. It will also continue to exist under the emperors as well. The extent to which all of this is true, I mean, who knows? The Roman Republic does start at this time. We have some initial evidence that definitely suggests that there was violence at the start of the Roman Republic. That even suggests that some of these individuals were real. Like these are not just mythical individuals. If you want to hear more about the story of the early Republic, I'm certainly more than happy to talk about that. So let me know with a comment if you want to hear that. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and I will go ahead and maybe carry on. If not, we could do something else. And like I said, you can always check out my podcast, the Pax Romana podcast. Thanks a bunch for checking out this video series. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I wish you well. Enjoy. Keep learning about Roman history. See you next time. Thanks so much for checking out this video. I very much hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, please like the video or leave a comment, or even better, subscribe to the channel. All of these things boost the channel tremendously in the YouTube algorithm. I also hope that you'll consider checking out my podcast, the Pax Romana Podcast. It uploads to YouTube, but it's also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and just about anywhere else you can get podcasts. Finally, if you want to, you can follow me on X. Just look up at Prof CPE, at PROF CPE, and you can find me there. And of course, I'll continue to upload YouTube videos about once a week. Hope you enjoy. Thanks a bunch. We'll see you next time.